Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, McMorton. My next guest grew up in Aberdeen, South Dakota, where she experienced a relentless lack of joy that stemmed perhaps from a deep belief that she could never fit in. Indeed, she felt if she expressed joy the way she felt it, it might actually get her killed. She escaped via a film school that brought her to Boseman, Montana, and then a stand-up career that brought her to Los Angeles, where she eventually stopped drinking out of something that sounds like sheer exhaustion. 4 years after getting sober, she began to live her real truth and started transitioning her gender from male to female. Won't you please welcome Fifi Dosch. So it's Fifi Dosch, yeah?
That's me.
Is that right?
Correct, Amundo.
And so starting at the beginning, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in South Dakota, which I feel like is I don't know, explanation enough for the rest of what I'm about to say in this podcast.
What town in South Dakota? I just drove through there on a cross-country road trip. So
really? I'm from Aberdeen, which is in the Northeast.
Northeast. I mean, we drove through it 120 miles per hour, so I barely don't have a great memory of it. But I was surprised actually by how good the coffee was in South Dakota.
Really?
I was expecting terrible coffee, and every place I went across the United States, I managed to find a decent cup of coffee, including South Dakota.
Did you go to a Caribou?
Did I go to Caribou?
Yeah.
No, a Caribou coffee?
Yeah.
No, it was it was near Sturgis, and it was some, hipsters that opened a coffee shop, and walked in, and it was oh, wow, there's great pastries here and there's decent coffee. I was I guess I could live in South Dakota. Who knew?
Nothing would make me happier than to watch Sturgis just turn into some gentrified hip town.
It could happen. It could totally happen.
I mean, the bikers, they'll literally exterminate everybody who does that, and they'll have to start new every year. But
amazing.
Just to ruin that for them would really make me happy. I have a friend who grew up in Sturgis, and he says it was rough.
I bet.
But the town I'm from, it's the third biggest town in South Dakota, and that meaning 25,000 people. Yeah, for real. It's the biggest town in South Dakota, I think, is Sioux Falls, and I think they're maybe at 200 and 250,000. Right. Even then, I feel like that's being quite generous.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was your childhood environment like?
I mean, I'm a trans woman. It was fucking terrible, dude.
Right. So, I mean, did you you're gonna have to forgive me if I ask dumb questions, but did you sense your unease with your born gender from the very beginning?
I knew, how can I put this? I knew that I felt like absolute shit, but I had no context of the idea that life could feel any differently. So it just felt normal to me.
And how did that manifest itself in your everyday life as a kid?
I mean, I was a really angry, miserable kid.
Right.
I mean, not to get too dark quite right from the beginning, but I mean, I'm not, this sounds really maudlin. I'm being literal. I literally never smiled. I couldn't smile in pictures. It looked too weird. It would look like an alien trying to mimic human emotions. I did not feel joy. It was awful.
That's intense.
And one thing through in my recovery work that I did notice is I remember the belief I was operating under. I wasn't conscious of this because I tapped it so far down, but the belief I was operating under was okay, what makes me happy and the way I'm happy and I can be happy is 100% not okay around here. I have no concept of being anywhere else. I'm a kid.
Right.
And I remember thinking if anyone sees me slipping, sees me being happy the way I want to be happy, they're going to fucking kill me. I remember I was driving down from I was on the interstate one time and I had to pull over like when I was working through some of this stuff. And I remember just crying and screaming, "They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me."
Right.
Now,
Literally.
would they have literally done that? I mean, no, but like my life would have been so miserable. I probably would have killed myself.
And did you actually endure physical threats when you were a kid? I mean, did you feel like that sort of otherness that people recognized in you, or were you good enough at hiding it that people weren't aware?
I mean, no one suspected. I wasn't like an
Right.
effeminate kid.
Right.
I mean, compared to the average South Dakotan boy, like, yeah, definitely. But like, you look through the lens now, like you would not have guessed that about me if you could go back and look at like. Also, I had like really bad issues with food because I didn't want to be in my body, so I just kind of like didn't treat my body well. And I look at it, it was like I was trying to use food to like push my soul out of my own body, you know?
Sure. And then at what point did you discover drugs and alcohol?
I came pretty late to drugs and alcohol, actually. Because I was just scared of getting in trouble. Like I was terrified of like slipping or making a mistake in any way.
Right.
And so like I don't think I had a beer till I was like 16, 17.
Right.
And even then, like I wasn't like heavily drinking. I didn't smoke pot until I left to college. Like my drinking and drug use really didn't start till I got out of the house.
Right. And were your parents together in your childhood? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And were you a good student?
Oh yeah, I was valedictorian in my class.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I'm probably the least successful as an adult.
Interesting. And like, what did you talk about in your valedictorian speech? Do you remember?
We didn't do that. I didn't.
But you didn't do it, right? And then where'd you head off?
It would have been real salty if I did.
Where'd you head off to college?
I went to Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska for a couple years. After a while, I kind of like once I got out of Omaha is actually a cooler city than you'd think, because this was in the mid 2000s, and this is when like emo and Saddle Creek Records were really taking off. So like Omaha had a really cool music scene for a while, and this was when I got exposed to some cooler people. And like another thing too, I think maybe if you're born after maybe, let's say like 1992, I don't think you really have a concept of a world without the internet. I mean, it's very easy to be like, look back in the past and be like, well, why were people so dumb and narrow-minded? It's like, because like if the people immediately around you weren't into something, you didn't know about it. You just didn't know about it. Like there was no, like we take information for granted these days. So, and like when you're from the middle of nowhere like me, it's just like, where am I going to go?
Right. Yeah, sure. And so did you find, like when you got to Omaha, like did you find a more sort of artsy, what were you studying?
I was studying English at the time, which was a stupid idea because like Creighton is a med school, but like I didn't get into the number one school I applied for. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm just going to this number two one. Right. And also like I had it in my mind that like you're supposed to go to a quote finger quote good school, which I guess Creighton was. But then I got there, I'm like, this is dumb. And like I realized I wanted to be a creative, so I transferred to Montana State and went to film school. They had a really good film school at the time, and that was when like my drinking, and that was when drug use definitely like ratcheted up big time. I kind of lived in a drug den for a while.
And like, what was your sort of go-to drink and drug of choice back then?
Definitely like, I was a big beer drinker. Like, mind you, I'm still a boy at this time. I didn't transition until I was like 33. I'm, low 20s at this point.
Right. What year were you born?
I was born in 1986.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, we were like super into beer. That's just kind of what everybody did back then. It's like Montana's a fun, like I have very fun memories.
What town in Montana were you in?
Boseman. It's a little Boulder, Colorado.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember I saw you on stage, I don't know how many years ago, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm.
And your opening line, it was pretty straightforward, but it was, it was basically a state like I'm a gay man. Like that was,
Mm.
I mean, that wasn't how you said it. Your delivery was really, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, and it may not have been the opening line, but it was something along those lines. So were you out by the time you were in Montana? Like at what point did you sort of, as far as like, your sexuality go?
Well, I mean, looking back in retrospect, like I was just 112% not prepared to accept the idea that I was a trans woman.
Right.
I lived as a gay man for a good while because it's like what I look at that now is I look at that as God going, okay, like she's not prepared for this, but we need to get her on this other side of the fence.
Right.
But I didn't come out as a gay man until like I think God, it was like I think it was I remember it was like New Year's Eve of that year. It was like early in the new year of 2011, and then I moved in like August to LA.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And where were you living at that point?
This is when I was still in Boseman.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you came out as a gay man at that point.
Yeah. And I was not sober yet. I didn't get sober till I came to LA.
Right.
But I was living in a place like we smoked so much pot, dude. It was like, and this was like 2009 when it was a way bigger deal. Montana had just voted in medical marijuana, but like, man, it's still 2009. It's Montana. Like the cops are going to harass you. So like my buddy had a big grow house going on in our house that we rented, which the house we lived in was just this like notorious college flop house in the town. Like we would tell people like 10, 12 years older than us, like, oh, we live at 502 North 18th. They're like, 502 North 18th? I took a shit in the sink there.
Right, that place is still standing?
Yeah, that kind of, I mean, I look at it that way too. Every time I go back to Bozeman, I drive by and it's like, all like redone and looks nice. I'm just like, if you people knew just the fucking Satanism that went on in this house, like you have no idea. But so my buddy was growing weed, and his plan was to make it as transparent as possible. So he would like invite the cops. He would be like, everybody, like put all your shit away. The cops are coming on this day. Make sure there's nothing in the house. And like we were all getting hooked up with weed, so like we were all down with this. So the cops would be like, here's what I'm doing. Here's what my setup looks like. I am within the legal limits. If you guys have any questions, here's my phone number, that kind of thing. But then our other idiot roommate, he ended up selling mushrooms to these Mormon kids.
Right.
And they got busted. And then one day, my buddy gets a phone call. We're listening on speakerphone. And the same Mormon kid goes, hey, I'm not going to say his name. Do you have any boomers? And he knew something was off. He's like, well, I don't know. And then the guy goes, boomers are mushrooms, by the way.
Yeah.
And then this kid on the other end goes, well, what are boomers? And he just hung up. And he was a military brat and he had family living in Okinawa. He fucked off to Okinawa. And then we had the cops watching our house for the rest of the time we lived there. And then we got to a point where like somebody's like uncle was a fucking dentist or something. So they had like a giant tube of nitrous oxide that they found in an old garage. And they're like, we're going to hit balloons and nitrous to everyone. Will be the nitrous hookup in town. But all that ended up happening was everyone just would sit in our basement, like doing hits of nitrous all day. It looked like a fucking Chinese opium den. And I remember walking back from class one day. I'm like, what is my life?
Right.
How did I get here?
And were you into nitrous?
I never really got into nitrous.
Right.
Yeah. It's a little too social for me, you know?
Nitrous is too social for you?
I mean, it was more just, that was like the cool kids having their thing. You know? I kind of didn't feel like part of the group, you know?
I mean, I didn't do it that many times, but I would do it and I was like, this has got to be so bad for you. Like, because all it does is just like immediately knock you out and then you're out for like whatever, a couple seconds, then you're up again. And I was sort of like, well, what's really the point of this? I mean, I didn't really get it, but
that was the thing. It just looked gross to me. Like it looked a bridge too far.
Yeah. And then what brought you to Los Angeles?
I realized I wanted to be a stand-up comedian because I'd always wanted to do stand-up, and like I still love TV and film, but like I realized that I liked them as a vehicle to do comedy, but I just never lived anywhere where it was like, hey, you can go do comedy.
Sure.
And Billings, which is the, again, quote unquote, big city in Montana, they had a bit of a scene. So I would drive up there to do shows and open mics. And then I started my own shows there in town and, in Boseman. And it was a fun time, man. I had a lot of fun doing stand up in Montana.
I bet.
Yeah.
And how did you start doing stand up? Like, what was the first impetus to get you up on stage telling jokes?
I had always wanted to do it because, like, stand up to me, like, again, where I grew up, it was just so fucking narrow minded. There was so little, like, acceptable shit people were into, And like I kind of got into the internet early, so I would get into some stuff that people in my town didn't know about. I'm like, hey, do you guys know about this band or these films that are going on? Maybe we could. I'm like, no, that's dumb. That kind of.
Right.
Let's listen to Chingy in our Abercrombie shorts by a bonfire for every weekend until we're dead was the plan.
Right.
But so I just remember being so mad. Like I felt so boxed in all the time. And like comedy to me, it was like something I would drive around and listen to when I was like mad at where I was, because there were these people that were just saying these wild things. And like I went to Catholic school for K through 12 too.
Mm-hmm.
So like it felt like this little thing that I had that nobody else got, that was like such a fuck you to like where I was growing up in.
And who were you into at that point? Like comedy-wise?
I was into people like Carlin. I was into people like Bill Hicks, who now I fucking can't stand. He can go fuck.
Right.
Yeah, he talks
So
about having sex with a 15-year-old in an album, and like,
right.
The
It's okay.
The only reason no one cares is because like he is washed out like the loser he is.
Right. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. But I was into like this again, like this was the mid 2000s, so like I was super into like David Cross, that kind of thing, Patton Oswalt.
Sure.
They were saying some wild shit for the time.
Yeah, sure. And so you start doing open mics in Boseman and having some success at it, and then what brings you to LA ultimately? Like, how do you make that move?
Well, I moved here to do stand-up, and I moved here because most of my graduating college class moved here, because like they're all film major. Like the film school where I lived was really, really like a film thing. Like we did not really feel like part of MSU. Like we felt like we were part of the School of Film and Photography. So a lot of them moved all out here, and like honestly, I don't really keep in touch with hardly any of them anymore. But
when you landed in LA, where did you end up?
We went as a college class. We flew out here. And there's this thing you could do called the LA trip, where you would fly out here and basically you would talk to a bunch of alums who would work in the industry, and they would do Q&A and be like, here's what I'm working on, here's what I did, here's how you get here, here's how you survive in the city, that kind of thing. And I remember I snuck out one night to go to the Comedy Store, which blew my mind. And I remember posting on Facebook that day, one day my name is going to be up in the Comedy Store. Now it is.
Wow. Yeah,
It's a dead name, but they're going to change it.
And who'd you see? Do you remember?
I don't remember who I vaguely remember Willie Hunter going. I remember Jade Catapretta was hosting. That's all I really remember.
Right. Amazing. And so then what you go back to Montana, and then you sort of come back to LA, you sort of like you get a sense of it, and then you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. And what was your plan when you were coming here?
I was just going to come here and hit the ground running doing comedy.
Right. And how did you support yourself in the meanwhile?
I worked on a lot of, I was like an office PA too. I had a friend from back in Aberdeen who was a production coordinator, and she would always hire me as her office PA and all the jobs she did.
Right. And then how did your drinking and using kind of play into your early days in Los Angeles?
Well, I had kind of stopped smoking weed fairly early because I got so paranoid on it.
Right.
Like, it stopped working for me really early, which I was grateful for. But like, I remember I would I would go out to an open mic and have like a drink or two, and like then I would go home and like drink a 40 or something.
Right.
My alcoholism was like, I mean, here's the thing. In Montana, like the thing to do is drink. Like you go out
Right.
to a bar, you go to a house party, you get wasted. That's what you
Right.
do.
Right.
But you know, in LA, like I feel like I A felt like I had something to do, and B, I felt like I didn't I just feel like my alcoholism got more and more isolating. So it would be like a thing where I would go out, maybe have a drink or two. It got to a point where I was like, I wouldn't, I decided I wasn't going to drink before I go on stage, but then I would like go home and drink a 40 and maybe a couple other beers or something like that and go to sleep. And that was like every night for however long.
And then what was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for you?
It was, I just remember being so fucking unhappy, you
Right.
know, like I was so angry all the time and like just felt like absolute shit all the time. And I remember I had just turned 29.
Uh-huh.
And I remember just thinking, like, next year I'm going to be 30. I don't want this to be my life. I don't want this to be my life. And I remember I was very, very good friends with Stephen Randolph at the time. I don't know if you know him,
I don't
but
think so.
he's a sober guy with some wild stories. He's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. But I would always kind of like entertain the idea of maybe getting sober. And I just decided, like, look, I just don't want this to be my fucking life, man. You
Right.
know? And
And did he take you to a meeting or something?
I remember I went to like a midnight one somewhere, and I remember I just kind of kept going. I remember the first meeting I went there, I called Steven, I was like, this meeting fucking sucks. He's like, and he's like, yeah, I know. It does suck. Some of them suck. It's like how some comedy spots suck. You should try another one. And I'm like, okay. And I just got into it, man. And I remember like flushing all the booze I had in my house down the toilet. And that was really, really, really difficult. I remember towards the end, I started to realize like I couldn't. I remember another thing too is like I felt old, you know, like I felt like an old person who's like I felt like my body was going down, and I'm like, I am 29 years old.
Right.
That just shouldn't be, you know. And I just kind of, yeah, I just didn't want that to be my life, dude. And and then honestly, like God, I it took a while. Like I didn't start transitioning till I was like 4 years clean.
Right.
And I remember like you hear people say like, you don't even pull your head out of your ass till you're 5. And I'm like, whatever, fuck you. You know, and then now I'm like, oh yeah, I wasn't even the right gender till like that time.
Right.
Yeah.
And how did that, I'm curious, how did that process evolve where you started to realize that like you were living the life of the wrong gender, like in sobriety? Like did sobriety have an impact on that? And like how did you like get in touch with that reality? I mean, that's got to be a pretty, I don't know, it's got to be a process to get yourself to that point where you're like, yeah, this is what's wrong, you know.
Well, you know, it's a lot of uncover, discover, discard, that kind of thing. Like a lot of that. Like I had to it involved a lot of dumping of old crap. Like I had to realize like, hey, it's not okay to be mean to yourself.
Right.
You ought to be good to yourself. And I'm also what's called a sexual anorexic. There are like programs for, I'm not going to say the name, you know, y'all know what it is.
Sure, but what does that mean, a sexual anorexic?
It's a form of sex addiction.
Right.
Kind of like how, you know, anorexia is a form of disordered eating.
Sure.
Like binge eating and anorexia are I mean, they're obviously polar opposites, but like they're the same thing.
Right. Sure.
A sexual anorexic, it's a form of sex addiction where it's like what a food anorexic is to their appetite, a sexual anorexic is to their sexuality.
Sure. That makes sense to me.
So like just like a regular human being, like human beings are sexual being, there's, their sexuality is a part of who they are.
Right.
I didn't think it was okay to like, I didn't think, I mean, for the longest time, like, I just didn't think it was okay to like to even like have a sexuality, really.
Sure.
I mean, and obviously, because like growing up, like if I would have like let any of that slip, who knows, like I'd been dead. I've been fucking dead.
Sure. I mean, I think even like in our society, like there's like this one form of sexuality, like heteronormative sexuality, that's been like celebrated and reified, and like anything that sort of deviates from that norm is kind of like, like there definitely isn't like a universal celebration of human sexuality. So much of it is a cause for shame and repression. I think that I think that the breadth of human sexuality naturally argues that there are probably more people repressing elements of their sexuality and trying to adhere to what is celebrated by our culture and media than than the thing that the media is actually celebrating. So
well, and do you mind if I elaborate a little more about sexual anorexic?
No, please.
Just because like I feel like recovery from this has been like one of the defining turning points of my life, and like not a ton of people are even aware that this thing is like, when I learned that this thing exists, I was like, holy shit, this has a name. Like, do you ever watch Succession?
I don't really, but
there's a character, there's a character on it who's like, they don't call him a sexual anorexic, but that's what he is. Now he has issues with sex on top of that are like have nothing to do with
which character is it?
Kieran Culkin's character Roman.
Right.
Like he like it's kind of a running thing where like people say that like he can't have sex with people and he's like repulsed by it.
Right.
That's the word for that is sexual anorexia.
Oh, interesting.
And like I remember I went to a meeting and they talked about like there was a whole like 50 question questionnaire, and it was like, do you find yourself going years without dating?
Right.
Do you find yourself avoiding social events?
Right.
And it's just like, I don't know, man. Like you're like the opposite of sensual all the time.
Right.
You're like the polar opposite of that every waking second. Like a stiff brittleness,
Sure.
And yeah, because like I remember like I would make out with people and I would just be like, I'm bored, like nothing is happening. Like whenever I would like force myself into a relationship and I'd be making out with a guy, I'd be like, okay, how long do I have to keep doing this?
Right. When can we go like eat Pop-Tarts again?
Yeah. Like when can I go home and isolate?
And
by the way, if you're out there and that sounds like you, hit me up on IG or something. I will tell you what I did. I am Fifi Dosch at FIFIDOSCH. I'll let you know what you can do.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. Gosh, there's a lot of questions I have.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, some of it's just like it's like you said they're going to change your name on the Comedy Store. When are they going to do that?
Well, they actually offered to do it last year, but at the time I was thinking I was honestly thinking I didn't want to do stand-up anymore. I was iffy on whether I wanted to still be in LA anymore.
Sure.
And after like a lot of soul searching, I realized like, yes, I do. And yes, I do. But like, they're going to change it because like at the time I kind of thought like, I kind of liked that it was like somebody else's name was on the store and like I could leave that part behind me.
What was your name again?
I'd rather not say.
Okay. That's all right. And because it's funny, I remember seeing you on stage. I think it was before, before your name had gone up there. What is the process even for getting your name on that thing? I don't know if people know, but like the Comedy Store has these names scrawled all over its awning and its wall, all the sort of greats who've played there, and then all the regulars who are part of the scene now, right?
I mean, it's, you get discovered by their talent booker one way or the other. And then they do like an audition. It's called a showcase for it, and then you're passed for it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And are you doing stand up now? Are you
I am
back
doing
on
stand-up now.
stage?
I'll
Yeah,
be perfectly honest. I was scared to go back to the store,
sure.
and and that place was like my family for a long
Right.
time. But like I have gone back, and here's the thing too. Like when I would tell, cause like I don't know, man, the fucking store was like Joe Rogan's club for the
Right.
longest time. During the 2000s, it was a fucking madhouse of reactionary horse shit. And it's just like when I would tell people like I'm afraid when I finally like decided I wanted to maybe get back into it, I was like, I'm kind of worried, wondering if I can go back to the store. And people like, no, that's the problem, Brack. But then like when other people were like, I totally get what you're saying. I was just like, thank you. I'm not crazy, But the fact is like it's been a really wonderful experience, and I've been having a really good time up there. I like what I'm doing. I actually enjoy performing now, because when I was living as a guy, like I was just like, okay, nothing makes me feel good at all because like my soul is not sitting in my body. So like, why am I doing this stressful nightmare thing that brings me no joy? It just fills me full of bad adrenaline that gives me no good feelings. And also,
Right.
like, I'll say this, like I kind of feel like I feel like what I'm doing there is like meaningful, in that I'm the only trans person there. And like I said, it used to be Rogan's haunt, and now he's fucked off to Texas, and I'm there. And I don't know, I feel like I'm doing something meaningful.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. And I can't wait to see your stuff now. Like, I
Hey.
mean, is it do you talk about your journey? Is that
Oh
sort of
yeah.
part of what you're talking about? Yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's wild. It's interesting. Like I mean, I haven't been going to a lot of meetings, and I went to one the other day, and I was talking of something you said about like how you spend the first 4 years of sobriety with your head up your ass, and like I'm 10 years sober, and like I feel like I'm just getting an inkling of like this whole notion for me of like keeping my side of the street clean has always been like not getting in trouble with you. And I feel like there is an element of sobriety where like actually keeping your side of the street clean is also showing up for yourself,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
also being your own advocate, and like living whatever your truth is, even though it can be upsetting to other people. That like part of your responsibility is to stay true to that, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. I feel like so much of my life has been about like trying to make sure everyone else is comfortable.
Yeah.
And I imagine like when I look at you and what you've been through, and where you come from, I assume that like you must have made so many people uncomfortable in the journey of staying true to yourself, right?
You know what, man? Not really.
Really?
Not
Like, what about
really.
how? I'm just curious about like your family.
My family is totally cool with what I'm doing. They're very
That's
supportive.
amazing. That's
Man, here's
great.
the thing. I used to be so rightfully terrified that like if I would show up to life as I really am, life would hate me. So I thought
Right.
like I had to be fake out there, and I could be myself maybe in my little mouse hole, but nowhere else. Um, I started transitioning right before COVID, and and I just decided I was gonna like I spent the first year of COVID like just traipsing around red states going camping, and I was a long time away from passing, but passing means like you can, like, people assume that you're a woman or a man without,
Right.
like, people don't assume you're trans.
Right.
No one gave me any shit. I felt a lot of love.
Right.
I'm still friends with nearly everybody I know from South Dakota on Facebook, like, and a lot of their parents. It's been nothing but supportive. My
That's
friends at the
amazing.
store have been nothing but support. Like, I really found out that when I show up to life as my own, life wants to love me, and life does want to love me, but like, I have to let it. It won't if I don't let it. And it won't if I don't avail myself to it.
Well, Fifi, I think that's a great place to end, to tell you the truth.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on, letting me share what it's been like.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.